Mr. Michael. We're here, and we're here to introduce Miss Unique. How you doing, Miss Unique?
I'm doing great. I'm channeling Flavor Flav here, because
I see that. That's a special gift for
this
him.
is a
for
tribute.
Later.
I'm paying tribute to Flavor.
Yeah.
We're gonna have him on a little bit later today, so that's why I've got all this getup on.
Yeah, it makes
Anyway.
sense. Makes sense. Well, I mean, we wanted to cover a lot of different topics, and in this particular episode, something that you and I have talked about over the years a lot is how Asians are basically stereotyped in Hollywood and the entertainment business, and of course, I'm not like that, from a standpoint of diversity, and I know Mike isn't, but and what do you think is? I mean, I still don't understand the Asian hate thing, and like Michael was asking earlier, I don't understand it.
I personally think it came up out of when COVID started. Because I noticed that when COVID started, I went to the grocery store. Everyone would just turn around, look at me, act hateful, because I guess they all look Chinese. I mean, to a lot of people, I look Chinese, but I'm not. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it was kind of similar to what happened during 9/11. People were kind of stereotyping the Middle Eastern person, anybody wearing that kind of clothing or appeared Middle Eastern.
Fear factor.
Oh, absolutely. That's what people had a lot of fear. There was a lot of uncertainty around COVID. Right. And, it's kind of like, I'm on some sort of a sleeper person. You know what I mean? I'm at a sleeper spot.
A sleeper cell.
Am I here to spread COVID and Mid-Tennessee kind of thing? Like, everybody looked at me with suspicion, and that was very difficult to deal with, actually.
Well, it had to be crazy. Yeah. I mean, because, it's not like you're in an Asian-dominant demographic in Nashville. So, I mean, even though we have a heavy Asian presence from Laotians, Thai, you don't see a lot of people from your culture in the Nashville area anyway.
What is your culture?
I'm Korean, but I grew up here, so I consider
myself. You grew up in Philadelphia, man. Don't let her lie to you.
Right,
yeah, that's how I know Will and the Fresh Prince and all that.
So how do you consider yourself an American Korean? Is that what that would be? Like?
It's very difficult for me to even consider myself Korean because, I was so immersed in a white neighborhood when I grew up. And my parents did their best to always move us into the best neighborhoods, the best schools. So we moved around a lot, which is very unstable considering my dad was not in the Army or service. We moved around so much. It's kind of crazy. But, of course, like a typical Asian family, immigrant Asian family, they wanted us to do well, go to Harvard, become doctors, because apparently that's the only thing Asians do, right? Go to Harvard Med School.
Well, that's the stereotype that I'm talking about. And I know from your acting career, the frustration you often relayed to me was that every single offer that you get, it's a doctor, it's something.
A reporter. It's the bad girl.
It's the bad girl. Yeah,
or thug, or a nail salon person.
Correct.
It's so stereotypical, which is unfortunate. But having been a professional actress for over 15 years, and I hate to say it, but it's a very white male dominated kind of a production company. I see women started going there as writers, directors, producers, and whatnot, but heavily it's still very white male dominated. So I think that's how they see Asians, unfortunately. As we're doctors, we're reporters, we're doing your nails kind of thing, and to a certain degree, there is stereotyping. Even Asians make fun of other Asians. For example, if you're Chinese, you own a restaurant. If you're Korean, you have a liquor store, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you're Indian or Pakistani, you have a 7-Eleven. Vietnamese, have nail salons. I hate to say it, but there is that kind of a trend,
And that's because culturally they follow, like the Indian culture. They actually have what they call in their culture prophets. And those are the business leaders. And what they do, everyone emulates because it was successful for them. They want to be like them. And I know that from being in industries where I interface with a lot of Indian culture to learn that. And close friends, Ash Patel, other people that I had the pleasure of working with. My question is, since China bought Hollywood up in the studios, which I don't think people quite understand that the Chinese bought Hollywood.
Pretty much in the LA Times.
And that's why you're starting to see in movies and TV shows more Asians, because what they're doing is they're popularizing them in an American market, and then they're bringing them back into China. It's no different than if you took a Filipino in an American stardom back to the Philippines, they become a bigger star in the Philippines because they must be big. They were big in America.
But it's also because of Netflix, Hulu, and all these other
Correct.
streaming platforms that we're able to see productions that came from other countries.
Correct.
And, like Squid Games was really popular in Netflix. And at first, I didn't want to watch it because it's very gory. It's very violent, a lot of blood. But, it was made in Korea, And I really felt like I had to watch this because it was made by my people, right?
Yo, people.
She's racist, man.
No, shame on you.
What about the Irish, okay? What about the Irish?
The old Irish.
The old Irish.
My question, though, is, and I want to understand and talk about it a little bit more when it comes down to the Asian hate or the Asian things. I watched something on the news, which I started watching the news because I wanted to start being more prepared, because I stopped watching the news many years ago. But I seen a lady that was being attacked, going up some stairs, and I didn't even realize she was Asian, but some man, for whatever reason, was throwing her downstairs, and then right in the same news feed, they had brought up the Asian hate kind of thing, and then they had this big black guy, really big guy, 300-pound guy, that just started attacking this Asian lady in a doorway, and he just punched her over like 100 times, and then I heard you, Randall, had mentioned it, and then I didn't know. I'm kind of out of touch with certain things because the media kind of drives me nuts a little bit. So I want to understand that. I mean, is that something that's really happening around the country? There's a lot of incidents.
I mean, apparently it's happening more in
larger cities.
Of course, where they're already having violent issues. But it seems somebody named Miss Unique said something very intriguing to me, and it made sense. And I asked her, I said, my question is, why does it always seem like the black guys in these cities are beating up Asian women? And the story was fascinatingly, it made sense to me, in other words. And what she's told me was that when the Asians move into African-American communities, right, or Black Wall Street areas, that the resentment is there because they see the Asians as intruders to their neighborhoods and taking revenue away from privately owned black businesses. And that seems to be where the resentment in some parts reside at. What's your opinion on that?
I don't know, because, we used to say this as a kid because there was always the Asian, because I was just telling someone the other day that as a kindergartner, I remember this store. I seen someone I haven't seen since kindergarten. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, do you remember because it was a cul-de-sac. It was like a keyhole or a cul-de-sac, whatever they call it. And on one side of it was a candy store. So in kindergarten, first, second grade, there was these Asian people. I think they might have been Laos or Vietnamese because it was around that time. They owned the candy store. So you remember the Asian people that owned the candy store? You know what I mean? And I'm thinking, but at the end of the day is, a lot of people get mad at foreigners, period, because the foreigner comes, opens a store, and everyone, and I don't know how true it is, and everyone thinks they get all these taxes free and all this stuff. And I think what I'm hearing is there's more lack of knowing and lack of understanding, because we live in a world of what we think or what we heard.
Perception.
Perception. So like you said, the Asian, the nails, or the reporter. And this is what blows my mind in America. We are America. And Asians didn't just come to America. Asians been here since I was at least the 51 years I've been on the planet. Yeah. And I know they've been here through when the Chinese came here. And what's crazy to me is how at this point now in 2022 that I'm familiar with the Irish. I know a little about Asians, but I know a lot about Asians, especially American. We're here. When I see you and I walk up to you and I talk to you, I don't stop and say, "Oh, you're an Asian lady," and now I'm talking to you. I just talk to you as a person.
See, that's how I think. Because I'm thinking, why are people making issues with these things when I go right back to the synopsis of, what happens in NFL games and other games where everybody's hugging and kissing. You ain't worried about, who's next to you, right? You're immune to culture when you go to those because you became one. I'm a Titans fan, right? A Saints fan. So I'm going to resonate with those teams, right? What is it that you think, other than the lack of education at home, do you think it has a lot to do with the educational system's failure to educate. I mean, you've been graduating people for over a decade that can't read and write, and they wonder why they can't be competent in government. And it's because a lot of those the government gives a lot of people entry level administrative experience, right? But they're bringing this stuff from these universities that's being fed into their head that they're almost an entitled mentality.
I just think it goes even farther in the last decade. I mean, what we're talking about, like, even though these violent crimes, and I don't think it's all like black or white. I just think that there's a tick.
It's absolutely not black and white.
There's a rise in people, and it could be. I never even thought about that because of COVID and the Wuhan situation. But I'm lost, I guess. I am lost for words to understand. When I go up to you, I don't say stop and say, this is an Irish white guy that I'm talking to.
Correct.
I don't even think like that. But for some odd reasons, our brains have slowed down that everything that everyone does, we don't talk about that American, that person that did something. We talk about the Asian or the Irish or the black guy or the Mexicans coming across the board, whatever it is. And that, even though that's a little far off, but let's just take it from the American standpoint. I've been here long enough to know that there's some of everyone that represents this country that was born here, raised here. We know that we all come from immigrant background, some way, 3 generations, 2 generations, 4 generations, whatever. Why is it, though, that we keep dividing ourselves? You know, we keep dividing ourselves. I don't look at you and say, you're Asian American, you're Irish American, I'm a Mud American. What difference does it make? What is the American culture? What binds us?
I think the binding is the diversity, and I think that's where they get lost, because America represents every culture in the world and from every culture, and that's what makes us the greatest country, is the fact that we had the privilege of not being one-dimensional in a culture, that we get to be the melting pot.
I like what you said, though. But I question what you say, though. You said that's what makes us the greatest. Are we really the greatest? If we're attacking the Asian people,
I would say we're the greatest because you cannot find an equal quality of life anywhere else.
That's what we're talking. And I don't want to. I agree there. But what I'm saying is, what makes someone great if we're attacking? If attacks on Asians are huge, if crime in this city against this other race here is up 700%. So I guess my question is, why are the Asians and the crimes against Asians higher? Never thought about it. It could be the whole COVID thing. Because I'll give you an example of what happened in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There was a man that went in there, and I don't know what his intentions were, but I assume it was a Sikh temple. It wasn't a Muslim temple. My assumption was
two different worlds.
Right, but see, lack of knowledge.
Correct.
Lack of not knowing. He went in there and killed a whole bunch of people. And he killed some police officers along with it. But he, I believe, thought they were Muslim. And he had something against Middle Eastern people. Not understanding. So there's people that hate and are angry at people. You're North Korean, right? Or South Korean. You're South Korean. You understand what I'm saying? And I don't know the difference in Asian, if you're Taiwanese, Vietnamese, Hmong. I just know because I might have grew up with you or been around you, and we've talked, and I knew that you came from Vietnam in 1978 and you became my friend. Or I don't know the difference between the Asians, but it doesn't even matter, because I'm not going to attack an Asian because whether you're Chinese, South Korean, whatever it may be, because I think something happened in China that created some disease. I don't know, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is help me understand what we can do.
I can tell you right now. I know exactly what you're saying, and I've laughed at this same conversation, and it was best if you remember King of the Hill. Mm-hmm. They did a skit on King of the Hill that basically describes America's mentality towards Asians. And it has been this way, and I can tell you growing up, this is the way that our perception was. And it's a question from a non-Asian to automatically ask, are you Chinese or Japanese?
That's the two.
Are you Chinese or Japanese? Because in the normal layman mind, you're one of the two. Nobody's going around, oh, you're Laotian or you're Chinese, Japanese, because the layman person who don't understand the cultures of the difference in Asian countries, that's the way they're going to flow.
But let me bring to you even the bigger ignorance of this whole thing. You were born and raised here. You grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood.
Well, you were born in Korea.
Yeah.
Okay, you were born in Korea. Yeah. Sorry, you were raised here. and you were educated here, and what I guess what I'm trying to say is, so you've been here your whole life. So if I think you're Chinese, I don't know you're Chinese, but even if you were Chinese, why would I attack you? And you've been here your whole life anyway. Why would I attack a Chinese citizen that came here on vacation because because I'm angry, or something happened in Wuhan?
You think they're guilty of something as a culture, and you take it out on everyone whether they're guilty or not.
It's part of the fear, and of course the uncertainty, not knowing what is going to happen. I mean, people still walk around with 2-3 masks on. It's 2022.
I just laugh at them, and because and I laugh at them because I feel sorry for them, and I don't know what else to say.
I think largely it's ignorance. It's like, because I'm an Asian person, of course I must be Chinese, because China is the only Asian country in the world, to a lot of people, right? Yeah. So, to some people who are ignorant, they would think, oh, I'm some Chinese person here to spread COVID in mid-Tennessee, right? I mean, that's how they probably perceive me, like, that's what I'm doing.
I'll tell you a true story, and this is indicative of more affluent areas, and I lived in an affluent area that housekeepers and nannies were normal. And, I wouldn't say normal, but a lot of people had those luxuries in that area. It was an upper echelon area. And my first wife, being Asian, was quite shocked. Obviously, we met in Seattle. She wound up moving to Nashville. And I'll never forget her coming home and asking me, we lived in Green Hills in Nashville, and she went to the mall in Green Hills, and she felt everybody staring at her, pushing the baby stroller of my son, Davian. And she was asked 3 times, are you the nanny? Because my son, even though half Asian, looks white. To the point that it looked obtuse that she would be a mother to this kid.
Right.
She must be the nanny. And they basically treated her that way in the retail stores, not as a mother. She felt that she was projecting that, and even though she's a very educated woman, that she was some immigrant here trying to work her way through the neighborhood and being a nanny. And it was so insulting to her because, like a lot of Asians, she was geared on that academic excellence, going to law school, whatever she was planning on doing at the time. But that's where my mind goes in this conversation, is that for the most part, perception, as you said, Michael, is it leads people to fantasia that's not real because it's something that they read or they heard or the enigma of has carried their thought forward.
Yeah, but America, I mean, I was in a band. We traveled to 49 states, so I've been around, the U.S. a lot. And unless you're in a big city like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, or D.C., you're not going to see a whole lot of, non-white people. I moved to Nashville 20 years ago, and even then, it was you were either white or black. I didn't see too many Hispanics. I knew maybe
Correct.
2 Asian people. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I ran into so many people who had never seen an Asian before here in Nashville. And I grew up in the D.C. area, Philly, L.A. I've been in big cities my whole life, so it's no big deal. You know what I mean? So
no, go ahead. So I don't want to interrupt you because I like your thought.
No, it was just so weird. I mean, coming to a place where everybody they'd never seen an Asian before unless it was on television, right?
I'm just trying to ask you this then. In your opinion, coming from an Asian woman that grew up in a white neighborhood that is highly educated, how do we fix it?
It's not going to happen anytime soon. The weird thing about I was born in Korea where everyone's homogenous, especially back when I was born. Everyone was Korean. We all had black hair, look alike. Everybody had the same haircut. So coming from a culture where everybody looks alike, does the same thing, and then you come to America, it's a complete melting pot, right? And that's the unique thing about the U.S. It's almost like an experiment, The U.S. is like an experiment where you're taking all these cultures, putting them in one place and saying, can you get along? And, it's in a way, in some places it works, in other places it doesn't work, because what happens when immigrants come is They like to, get together into the little immigrant groups. They're the ones that segregate themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So.
Well, and I want to add to that, and a lot, and I'll tell you, when I lived in San Francisco or in other Seattle, San Francisco, where dominantly Asian demographics exist, I lived next door to Chinese neighbors who refused to deal with me as a neighbor.
Because you're white.
Because I'm white. And I will tell you that anybody that knows me knows I walked out the door probably half naked with a robe on and said, "Hey, how you doing?" The New Orleans thing coming out. And I didn't realize that it's such a stature culture in the Asian cultures that the misconception is they're not friendly. And that's not true. What they told me in those areas is, Randall, it's not you. It's the fact that they don't want to be embarrassed because of their broken English. And it's not that they don't like white folks. It has nothing to do with that. They're not really a prejudiced culture, unless you get overseas and they're indoctrinated into hate. And some of those countries exist. Indonesia, heavily Muslim countries where they have their motives. But I think that the main thing that has to happen is people should grasp the cultural divide as a learning experience and a cultural enhancement that you get by learning what it is that make the Koreans no different than us. Because here she is, totally Americanized, 30 years later to getting here as a child. Parents raised her. They had an amazing story even getting here from Korea. Number one, like any of those folks. I've had partners before who were in those ships. I've had Chinese partners before who were in those ships who had to eat their friends and drink urine. These are real stories. But the condition of the mind as it relates to Asian cultures, in the stature that they are, they don't speak up enough, in my opinion. That's where I'm driving to. If my neighbor would have just got to know me, he'd have known that I loved his accent, that I loved the difference in us, and I was a sponge to it, which is what I'm known to be culturally. Anyway, I love it because I want to know, I want to eat the food. I want to know everything there is to be in Chinese.
It's also a matter of trust, because even my parents to this day, they only have Korean bankers, Korean lawyers, Korean doctors, Korean food. I mean, that's all they do. Even though they're in America, they've isolated themselves in this Korean community.
But do you think all cultures do that? Subcultures?
No.
Because
I think maybe the parents, the adults that come over tend to stick with what they know, and it's the children that grow up in the Americanized culture.
And because my first wife's dad would only buy from Filipinos. He would only deal with Filipinos.
See,
that's how that's how it is.
And now we're talking, and I think we're talking about two things, meaning the ones that were raised in the foreign land and then came here and want the best for their children, and then we're talking about the children.
And the children.
And then there's
two different
conflict, meaning they might some adapt a little bit to this, and some just all the way adapt to the culture.
Don't you have old world and new world?
Right. But this has been my whole topic, because I really, I just learned about this Asian hate thing going, but I never heard anyone bring up I understand how people, because I'm one of those people, I don't know who's who from Asia, and I wouldn't be able to differentiate, culture other than you're Asian, right? But I think America's flaw, and I'm a multicultural kid, or man, old guy, whatever I am, but I'm trying to figure out, I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me what, and I'm gonna get this. This is question one, 2 parts here. What is the American culture? What makes America
We're talking hamburgers. But
hold on, but no, for sure. I was gonna say that, but hear me out. If I go to Korea, I guarantee at the end of the day, I'm not saying there's not different cultures, and you might have these from this region, that region, but at the end of the day, you guys are Korean, and you have something bond, some common cause, some common bond. When it all falls back together, you're Korean. And you're going to stand on that. Even if you're from this region or that region, our food might be a little different this way or that way, you're Korean and you're going to stand on that, right? What happens now, and I'm an older guy, I'm a grandfather. What is the American culture? Like, truly, that we can all, you being Korean, me being multicultural, him being Irish, what can we hold on to together, no matter what our agreements are? Forget religion, and I don't mean it in a bad way, forget religion. I'm just saying, set religion, set politics to the side. What can we stand together as Americans? What is the culture?
Well, coming from another country, I would say it's the freedom. You know, the U.S. has a lot of freedom. You're not going to see
deep.
anywhere else. But, of course, freedom taken too long, you know, where you're burning a flag or, you know, you're just doing things that are just crazy, you know, like slapping somebody on television. You know, how much freedom can you possibly have? You know, too much freedom's not a good thing either, because in Korea, this is the thing about Koreans. My mother used to always tell me, I am Korean, therefore I represent all the Korean people.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine the pressure I had growing up as a child, that every little single thing that I did was to represent the Korean people? I mean, like,
Let me ask you this. You're a Korean American now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, how the hell do you represent America?
That's the divide between immigrants and their children. It's huge.
No, I get that, but I mean, the only reason I'm asking this is because and I don't know the answer, and I don't think there is an answer, but I think what we're lacking here in America, because we have a lot of subcultures, we have a lot of history. Everybody has participated in what we do in this country. If everyone really studied the American language, guess what? It's a gumbo. You know, there's some of everybody's here. If we look at the American diet and the menu, guess what? You don't have to go to a Chinese restaurant or a Korean restaurant. If I go look and really look deep, some of everyone's food, we all eat each other's foods. You know what I mean? Whether it's a tomato or whatever it is, a fruit or something. My point is, I think America lacks culture. And I'm going to tell you why. We have a lot of culture here, but we have nothing that we can all stand on one thing.
But that goes back to why what you're looking for is in the metaphor I used in the NFL and NBA and NBL stadiums. When the score happens and everybody's jumping up,
everyone,
they're hugging,
black, Asian,
white,
Indian,
they don't give
Latino,
a shit. But that's what you just
high-fiving
said.
And hugging.
That's what people have to remember is
game time.
Game time.
So it's always game time.
It's always game time.
So then why can't I always be happy and high five you? I don't care.
Absolutely.
It just, when I hear people say stuff, when I hear the news say, oh, African American or black, and even the blacks, even the Latinos, it's like we've been taught to divide each other.
Correct.
On top of the government and corporate America helping divide us. So what I'm trying to figure out as an older man is, what the hell is my American culture? Yeah, can I go to my Mexican culture? I know what that is. I understand that. Can I go to my German, and my Jewish German culture? Yes, I can. Can I go to my African American culture? Yes, I can. But I just want to be all three of those things and be an American. And even if we disagree, and you might be a Republican and I might be a Democrat and you might be an independent, who cares? That's exactly what we're here. You're in America. Correct. To have the freedom to choose. My opinion is my opinion. Your opinion is your opinion. But the fact is, I think America, and I will challenge anyone, any scholar, tell me what the true American culture is. And if you can tell me that and be right about it, how come we're not all tied to it and bonded to it? Why do we always have to separate? Why does everything have to be Asian or the white man?
Well, I think it's called labeling. And if people don't label, and that's what I tell people, I don't use labels. I don't go. I'm like you. I don't go around. Oh, look at that black guy. Look at that green girl. What the fuck? It's just. I mean, this is crazy, and that's why people like us on this show bringing this conversation out. It makes people think that why can't you be always on Game Time?
But it's also about having a commonality. Like, Koreans have a commonality. You know what I'm saying? Like, Mexicans have a commonality. But when you've got a bunch of Americans with a melting pot, 20 different, backgrounds, cultures, you have to find a commonality that's going to unite them and bring them together.
Thank you. That's my whole point.
Which is difficult in this day and age, because this is the meat culture.
But it should have been put a long time ago, and we should be standing on that.
Yeah, but now we're living in a meat culture where everyone's about the selfie, everyone's about, their TikTok account.
I get it, but I know this for sure, and I don't disagree with you. All I know is what people don't want. Because it's kind of like a criminal. A criminal really don't think about going to jail. He just thinks about committing his crime. You know what I mean? Correct. He thinks about his end result. Yeah. Jail is just something that happens when you get caught. It's a byproduct of being a criminal, right? Correct. So when they're sitting in their cell, they're like, oh, shit, I'm not going home for a while. Oh, no, I'm going to have to snitch on my friend. Whatever the story is, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I lost my thought, man, but it was going to be good, too. All I know is this.
Cut.
I know what people don't want, and I don't care what anybody says because they don't want to get deep with me. Is I would never want, and I'll use the German Americans to leave America. Because remember, if the Germans leave America, we're not just talking about people. We're talking about people that are mixed with German. That means I got to go because I'm not just one. I got a piece of German. It's like a fraction.
Yeah, but that goes back to what is the American culture? Because somebody came here from Germany, somebody came here from Ireland, somebody came from here, right? We need to integrate into whatever that central culture is. Except people don't do that. Immigrants don't do that.
Never had it.
Yeah.
But let me explain this to you: is remember, America is exactly what you just said. The Germans came. The Koreans came.
And they set up their Chinatown, the Koreatown. They set up, that's what they do.
But we still built this. As everyone came in, they kept building with us. You know what I mean? Whatever year was it? 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago, right? So let me just get this thought off. What happens is, if the Germans were leave right now, today, that means anyone that's mixed with German don't exist no more. Let's take away all the language that none of us even have a clue, and I can guarantee you have a lot of language in there. All the foods, all the clothes, all the fashion is gone. Guess what? We can't be America then.
Well, that music says this episode is over, Mike.
It's time to love Asian. Our end conversation is if you find an Asian, you need to love them.
Give them a hug.
You're giving them a hug, and it's OG and G.